Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the moderators and to the other speakers. Dr. Prieto, I really appreciate the work that you shared with us. I think that what I want to talk about a little bit is that what's going on right now. And pretty much the world is experiencing a shift of what I feel is like an epoch level dimension, right? There's so many different things that are happening around the world right now. And these changes are forcing us to change in paradigms throughout all disciplines, right? And this is just as true in the field of economics. And we need a shift in paradigm, and we need a shift, and from my perspective, how we formulate economic concepts and practices in the field of economics to be more in line with what is happening in the 21st century. The kind of education that I received, right? I pretty much like I remember the transformation to the me generation with Reaganomics, supply side economics, and trickle down economics, right? And it's clear that this 40-year experiment has disproportionately swayed financial and economic power into the uber rich, right? The cutback in regulations, the tax breaks favoring the rich, and the creation of financial derivatives that produce trillions of Wall Street dollars did little to trickle down to the main streets of America. Instead, right, industry went global, finance became secular, and the uber rich amassed an obscene amount of wealth. And amidst the evolution of the global technology, and there was a change in the spirit, there's this change in the spirits of men and women today also, right? But the socioeconomic conditions of the American working class and the middle income class and the working poor through all of this has almost stayed steady state, as the majority of Americans are doing their best to maintain, while abundance appears to be all around, but none of it is at our own kitchen tables. And today, the children of the working class and the middle income class and even the rich are recognizing the hypocrisy of the status quo that justifies the extreme wealth and income differentials that were generated during this late stage of industrial capitalism. But what we see and what's happening right now is that on the wings of a budding new age, right, a lot of the young folks are taking matters into their own hands, using a huge amount of intellectual energy and emotions, going into areas of creation and disrupting the status quo. I think about what's going on in the area of Bitcoin, for example, right? Disrupting the financial center and their monopoly power. Reddit and Robinhood and the trading platforms are being used to challenge Wall Street. Black Lives Matter is challenging the bigotry and racism. And even the January 6th Capitol insurrection, right? All of it are signs of cracks in the norms and values of industrial capitalism of the 21st century that was born in the 18th century. And from my perspective, it is here that the Black political economy is ready to take its place, challenging the assumptions and values of much of the dominant paradigm in economics, and pave the way for what I feel, and other people, definitely the people on the panel, a way for a more humane and just socioeconomic environment with a perspective and a policy more fitting the change in epoch that we're experiencing now. The industrial age of capitalism the pendulum is swinging back to what we feel is what appears to be an early stage of a quantum leap in human potential, as the pendulum swings back from hyper individualism over the last 40 years to a more cooperative and collective actions. And the conditions of a paradigm shift are happening right now for all of us to see and for all of us to experience. Right. So my presentation here is the idea that my work, or the work in Black political economy, could be the bridge between economics of scarcity and economics of abundance. And this is just a particular perspective. So right here, this is Lloyd Hogan, right? And Lloyd Hogan, this is my mentor in the field of economics and political economy, Lloyd Hogan laid out a brilliant political economic analysis that synthesized the works of Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and W.E.B. Du Bois. And he was, in his day, he was inspired to respond to the absence of any significant economic analysis of the Black condition over and beyond just the compiling of facts and figures and a straitjacket approach to economic policy. In fact, I would say, from my perspective, Lloyd Hogan committed academic suicide by not fulfilling the obligations of a PhD, by making the decision to study scientifically the social economic conditions of Black Americans while at the University of Chicago. That was unheard of. And from my perspective, Lloyd Hogan is one of the greatest political economists of the 20th century that many of you never have heard of, let alone studied. Right here, we have the key to his work in his Principles of Black Political Economy and his definition of political economy as the study of a human population undergoing the act of social reproduction over a protracted period of time under a set of rules promulgated and enforced by a political state within a bounded geographical domain. I understand that that's a mouthful, but it is the foundation of analysis applied to an artificially created Black population, as W.B. Du Bois would call the so-called American Negro, during using the language of his time. This population was bounded together from a long common history of being free men and women on the African continent, with their lives being disrupted by a Holocaust of slave trade, Middle Passage, hundreds of years of chattel slavery, freeing themselves through their own efforts and other efforts, but caught up in a new form of bondage called sharecropping. And again, being freed both internally and externally through their own efforts, but landing into another political economic system of capitalism, primarily as wage laborers with very little opportunities to spin off a capitalist class, also in an environment of separate and unequal. I personally have come to use Black political economy as one of the tools to help me understand my own place in this world, helping me to understand that the poverty that I've seen, or that is being experienced in many Black and segregated and often ghettoized communities in the United States and throughout the world, is in direct correlation to centuries of wealth creation for others. But here's the paradigm shift, okay? And I call it the bridge, right? So at the end of his book, The Principles of Black Political Economy, he says that in sum, Black Americans stand at the threshold of a worldwide social revolution. Their unique history of suffering and struggle for survival places them in an unparalleled position to be exemplars to the rest of exploited people of how a new social order can be conscientiously fashioned to reflect the perfectibility of the human condition here on Earth, okay? And right, to be exemplars to other exploited people around the world, right? Black Americans would have to learn to do for self, right? And Lloyd Hogan decreed, and again, like as Dr. Leon Prieto presented, there are so many people who have presented this idea of Black Americans needing to present and build their own safety net. And this is not new. And also going back to Du Bois, right, in the 1930s. My growing conviction has been since the Depression that the fundamental problem facing American Negroes is securing a place in American industrial life. I am certain if they simply wait to get their share in any change of plan and reorganization of economic life in America, the so-called race problem will show itself by making their entrance into the economy late and uncertain. And for that reason, I want Negroes to begin intelligent planning for themselves, not of course for a separate economy, but for the purpose of seeing how far their own efforts can help them towards economic security. Now, what myself and Dr. Gordon Nembhard have done is that we've kind of added in, a policy perspective to this Black political economy, and the policy perspective we call cooperative economics, right? And as has always been alluded to already, Dr. Gordon Nembhard in her book, Collective Courage, lays out a history of economic cooperation in the Black community. And also what I'd like to say that was in the book, but also both of us looked at, is the role of the Mondragon, the cooperative complex in the Basque lands of Spain, as one of the greatest experiments in applied cooperative economics in the modern capitalist dominated geopolitical economic system. And through our work, we've considered it as a model that could be relevant in Black communities in the United States. And we add that and add our analysis as part of cooperative economic policy. And then my own work was looking at the intellectual contributions of W.E.B. Du Bois in the areas of cooperativism and cooperative economics. You know, Du Bois has, he's been claimed by many different disciplines, sociology, the arts, and what have you. But, Du Bois was an economist. So we've come to see that Black political economy, cooperative economic policy, and community building practices are linked, right? And as economists, what I would say that they are just as linked as, for example, neoclassical economics, right? The mainstream, the kind of economics that's been being taught in most of the colleges and universities throughout the United States. This form of economics, it's a framework. It has a theoretical framework with a policy of laissez-faire, hands-off, right? And the actual application is profit maximization businesses. Or how about Keynesian economics with their general theory and their role of government intervention and fiscal monetary policy to respond to the socio-economic concerns of society. Or even Marxian dialectical and historical materialism and class analysis with policy orientated towards class struggle and the working class. Chancellor Williams, in his classic Rebirth of African Civilization, has reminded us, and so did Dr. Leon Prieto, right, that these are Eurocentric perspectives vying for the African mind, both on the continent and in the African diaspora. But they diverge from Black African culture of a long history of communalism and economic cooperation, not as ideology, but just as making common sense. Okay, so again, from our perspective, right, we are developing a framework. I'm working on a framework of Black political economic and political economy and theory, cooperative economics and policy, and community building and practice. Okay, so just recently, Bob Proctor just passed away, but he was well known for his motivational speaking, and he talked about change your paradigm and change your mind. And what I'm sharing here is that we also are wanting to change our paradigm, right? Change our paradigm from, again, what I'm showing is this idea of economics of scarcity, right? The ideas, and again, these are the pillars of what I would call economics of scarcity. People like Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes. But there's this other language that I call economics of abundance, and people who I would consider like Neville Goddard or Bob Proctor or Napoleon Hill. Now, my work in Black political economy, I've considered significantly the Afrocentric forms of ancient Afrocentric thinking, right? But the Neville Goddard and Proctor and Napoleon Hill, they've taken this idea, this alternative way of thinking, right? That all is mind, and developed pretty much a lot of motivational aspects and actual concerns. And my own feeling, right, and my own practices, when I look at doing applied work and applied research in my community and motivating our communities, a lot of the work about concern for self, right? Self-actualization, self-confidence in our communities, especially with our young men and women, that's critical, right? And the language of Neville Goddard, for example, all is mind, right? That opens up this door for what I would call the economics of abundance. So from my perspective, right, the work of Lloyd Hogan, myself, Jessica, in cooperative economic policy can act as a bridge away from the concepts of scarcity that we've been taught for the last 250 years and practiced and built, right? I mean, the world is, the economists talk about this world of scarcity, but the truth of the matter is that there's abundance all around us. It's the man-made institutions that have generated this idea of scarcity. So again, change your paradigm and change your life, right? And so I'm not going to go complete deep into the alternative paradigm that Lloyd Hogan has presented, but what I do want to speak a little bit about, and again, I know there's a lot of economists who's on this call right now, and you're familiar with the neoclassical circular flow diagram, where you have the household, you have the firms, you have labor, you have income, you have prices, and you have goods and services. So what I want you to imagine, right, is that the household, right, if we look at the household not as just a site where people are just consumers, but that it's a site for production, right? And what's being produced, right? The human being is being produced. Human energy is being produced, right? Another thing that Lloyd Hogan has made in his contribution, especially, again, if we look at this neoclassical circular flow diagram, Lloyd Hogan designed what he called the institutional mechanisms of social reproduction. And the key components of it, again, is the household and the firms being considered as labor processes, the internal labor process in the household, the external labor process in what we call the firm. And then we have the labor for income, which in the capitalist economy is typically done through the market process, right? The labor is bought and sold in the market. Goods and services are bought and sold in the goods and service market. But Lloyd Hogan, in his institutional mechanisms of social reproduction, talks about well, in the modern capitalist economy, labor markets and goods and service markets, just as distributional mechanisms, okay? So some of the key points that I feel using Black political economy, shifting us from the economics of scarcity to the economics of abundance. And I really feel that today in the 21st century, right, especially this post-pandemic period, right, that we really are experiencing a change in epoch. And we need a change in paradigm, a change in thought, a change in pedagogy, a change in practice that responds to what's going on in the 21st century. So some of the things that Lloyd Hogan has presented, right, that I feel that, again, now Lloyd Hogan was, he was trained in also the materialist concepts of economics of scarcity, and I'm bouncing off of that into this field, what I call economics of abundance. But what's important in that transition, right, is the transition from the circular flow diagrams of the neoclassical model to this idea of institutional mechanisms of social reproduction, right? And me as a, I would consider myself as a micro-political economist, and I focus on what we talk about, we call the household in neoclassical economics, but in Black political economy or political economy in general, we call it the internal labor process, right? And so this internal labor process, right, is the way we look at it is that if you look at, for example, if you look at the firm, this is, using neoclassical model, right? This is a production process where inputs are converted into outputs. Those of you who have taken some basic economics, right, you have the production function. Output is a function of capital and labor. An innovation of Lloyd Hogan was that the household was also a production function, right? Inputs are converted into outputs, right? And what's being created? Well, for Hogan, what was being created is human energy, right? And that human energy manifests in the human being, right? And the kind of language of Bob Proctor, Neville Goddard, right, Napoleon Hill, is that the human being we have an opportunity to tap into our curious consciousness, our curious thinking. We have an opportunity to tap into our critical consciousness, our critical thinking, our creative consciousness, our creative thinking, our constructive consciousness and our constructive thinking, and building a political economic analysis that can house that and develop the framework and facilitate an analytical discussion and understanding of this idea of human energy and the human being, and shifting. Those of you who are on the call who are not economists, what I'm talking about pretty much is shifting away from looking at economics and focusing our intellectual labor on the production and distribution of goods and services, and shifting it away to focusing on who we become as human beings, right? Shifting away from goods and services, material things, to the human being. So a critical aspect, right, that Lloyd Hogan has done, right, is like right here, we have labor. A lot of the language of the economics of scarcity is about labor. Lloyd Hogan shifts his analysis from labor to human energy. Now, human energy, right, can also be considered just energy, right? That it's a particular manifestation of energy, right? Manifestation in the form of the human being, right? Another aspect that is critical from this paradigm shift from economics of scarcity to economics of abundance, using Black political economy as the bridge, is, again, as I said before, shifting from looking at the household and the associated consumerism to internal labor processes and the production of human energy in the human being. This is significant because if you think about it, the capitalist, right, used the production process. They converted resources, inputs to produce all the goods and services that we're familiar with right now, right? Galvanizing land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial skills to produce the goods and services. Now, going back to the internal labor process in the household, right now, I feel that that we can be just as rigorous in organizing the conversion of inputs into outputs, so that if we want human beings who reach the heights of their human potential, the heights of their human productivity, that we have to do it in a very conscientious way. And Lloyd Hogan's and the principles of Black political economics opens up the door for that level of conversation. Also, when we talk about energy, right, human energy, in the Eastern thought, we talk about the Tao, right? We talk about prana, right? We talk about source energy, right? I think that right now, today in the 21st century, as we're moving into this new the manosphere, right? That we really pay specific attention to this idea of energy, right? Also, a lot of the economic models have been built off of Newtonian physics, but a lot of the language of the 21st century is we're moving more towards quantum physics. So Black political economy opens up the door from that transition from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, talking about frequencies, the human being as operating at different frequencies, different vibrations. Also, the transition from material science to spiritual science, right? We've used physical science and we organize it in the form of physical technology, right? But the same rigor, right? If we think about the universe, some people talk about it as chaos, right? But it's really a cosmos, right? And so it's like a lot of times, a lot of our work in the material world is chaos. But with right thinking and right consciousness, we could bring more cosmos into our actions and our practice. And I know that the language of the economists especially the Eurocentric model of economics, to talk about spirituality in the academic environment. We really don't talk about spirituality, but I think that for us to move forward in the 21st century, talking about spirituality, right, in a very rigorous way is very critical. And the transition, and lastly, again, moving from physical science and physical technology to taking seriously the idea of mental science and mental technology. So more insights, right? What is the new language, right? The new language is no longer is it about profit maximization and cost minimization. The young people of today's world, right, are looking to pursue their dreams, their goals, their desires and aspirations, or the success as a progressive realization of a worthy idea, right? Those can be brought into the fold of economic analysis, right? A lot of times we are influenced by these concepts of fear, doubt, insecurity, and indecision. But 21st century young men and women, right, what do we want, right? They want to be able to do what they love to do what they're good at, and make a contribution to the greater good and get them paid for that. Not the kind of wage peonage or debt peonage, or even the kind of economic exploitation of the 20th century, right? The idea of spirituality, tapping into spirit, inspiration, hunches, intuition, the use of visualization, imagination, intentionality, right? All of these are opens up a whole new perspective that will allow us to move into the 21st century. Louise Burley would say, your most important attitude is attitude of self. In my own work, I've discovered that as we try to introduce cooperative economic practices, that having supreme confidence in your own skills and your own self is critical to that process, right? So I'm going to close up right here and just give homage to Lloyd Hogan and his contribution to using Black political economy that I've moved on forward using as a transition from economics of scarcity to economics of abundance.
Oh, thank you so much. What a beautiful picture of you and Lloyd. Wow.
Thank you.
And any of you who know my book, now maybe you understand why one of the people I dedicated Collective Courage to is Curtis, because of he's just such an inspiring thinker. And he's really the one who even got me into this whole area of thinking. So thank you again, Curtis.
Thank you.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.